What is up, everybody? It's the Raw Prospect Podcast. We're back with episode 44.
45.
45, right. 45. And we've got a lot to cover here. We got the
co-host Michael Ween. He's Emmy Nixon. Today, we're going to be covering two NFL stories, two big NFL stories. The Cam Newton one, and then there's a Jamal Adams story that's also pretty interesting. And then we're going to start, since the calendar has turned to July, and the NBA season returns July 30th, we're going to start our preview for the return of the season by previewing some of the Eastern Conference. So we have a lot to get to, so why don't we just get started? I think we're going to start with the NFL conversation. So we'll just go ahead and get into it. I believe it was on Sunday night, we got news that the New England Patriots were signing former Carolina Panthers quarterback Cam Newton to a 1-year veteran minimum contract worth $1 million at base salary with about $6 to $7 million in incentives. So, Emmy, I'll start with you. I want to get your thoughts on the signing, your thoughts on Cam, and then I want you to give the signing a grade.
Okay.
So just go ahead and give me your thoughts.
Well, first things first, I think it's a great signing. I think some of the things that you heard on Twitter, people saying like it's not going to fit, he doesn't fit the Patriot way, things of that nature. I disagree with that. If you look at Cam, the last time he was healthy, he was just getting started with the North Turner offense, which we know is a short passing scheme, dink and dunk, kind of more like the Patriots offense. And he was having some of the best games of his career. His efficiency was the highest it had ever been. And before his injury, I mean, who knows what he could have done in that season? He had 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, career high in completion percentage, and he was fantastic. His team was 6-2, and then it all, as we know, it all went off the rails. But he's back, and if he's healthy, then there's reason for me to believe that he can lead this team,
Yeah. You mentioned it. Everyone wants to bring up, with Cam Newton, the fact that he's 0-8 in his last 8 starts, dating back to, the first 2 games of last year and the last 6 games of the year before that, starting with that blowout loss in Pittsburgh after they started that season 6-2. I remember that game, of course, because I'm a Steeler fan. Good times. Everyone wants to bring up, how he's been terrible, basically, in his past 8 games, and how he's winless and all this stuff. But you brought it up. In that Steelers game, T.J. Watt hit him and injured his shoulder, so he was never the same after that. That's why he had shoulder surgery, his second shoulder surgery, after that season. But before that, in the first 8 games of that season, he was completing, as you mentioned, 68% of his passes, 15 touchdowns to 4 picks with a 101 quarterback rating. So if you look at the last time he was healthy, he was a top 10 NFL quarterback. Just look at his stats. Now, I think it's a good signing for the Patriots. Of course, it's going to be an upgrade over Jarrett Stidham. We just don't know. The Patriots say they like Jarrett Stidham, but we just haven't seen him. Aside from a couple preseason appearances, we don't know what he is. Okay? So I think it's a good signing because he's an upgrade over Stidham and whoever else they have. I think it's Brian Hoyer. I think that given, of course, his health, that's the biggest question. If you think about it, he's going to have improved protection from a better offensive line than he had in Carolina. That's going to be a big factor. and the support system of Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. Both guys are going to be very important. I think Cam can be a top 15 quarterback, maybe even top 10, and elevate the Patriots into playoff contention, meaning I think wild card. I still think Buffalo's has the better roster, and I think they'll probably win the division. But I think given those circumstances that I just mentioned, I think Cam can take them to a wild card berth and possibly win, depending on the matchup, a playoff game or two in the playoffs. I think that's fair to say. 9-7, maybe 10-6 at best. I mean, that'd be a great season, especially after losing a guy like Tom Brady, who was the franchise.
I have some. Let's just dive into the numbers real quick. I have so for his first 8 games of that 2018 season, his adjusted completion percentage was 78%, 7th in the NFL. So adjusted completion percentage is just taking out drops, throwaways, spikes, things of that nature. And if you look at his deep passing, his passes over 20 yards, he only completed 45% of those. So that actually, because it's crazy, but if you think of Cam, you think of the deep passes, his crazy arm, throwing guys like down the field. But actually his strength, the last time he was healthy, was the short passing game, what the Patriots hang their hat on. So I think he'll make for a much better fit than people will give him credit for.
Yeah, I gave the signing a solid B. I do have concerns, as does everybody. The major ones are, first of all, his health and injury history. That's the biggest one. We all know that. No need to regurgitate that. He hasn't been very consistent in terms of his accuracy. He's not the most accurate of quarterbacks. According to Pro Football Focus, over the past 3 seasons, Cam Newton ranks 36 out of 41 qualified quarterbacks in accurate throws percentage. It's some statistic that Pro Football Focus has. He's at the very bottom of the league in that statistic over the past 3 seasons. We know his inconsistencies in that area. He's a career 59% completion percentage quarterback. If there's anybody who can fix it, I mean, we've seen good stretches. He's just been inconsistent. And if there's anybody who can fix it, it's Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick. And then finally, I think New England's weapons, not necessarily that they're worse than Carolina's, but they're less talented. If you're looking at it, I mean, I think Edelman's a great player and his production speaks for itself, but some of that can be attributed to Brady, and I think DJ Moore is the more talented player. If you look at the number 2 receivers, Sanu and Curtis Samuel, I think they're basically kind of the same player in terms of production. It's kind of a wash there. They have above average running backs in Sony Michel and James White, but we're talking Christian McCaffrey here. I mean, come on. So it's going to depend on a lot of factors, and those are kind of my concerns. But again, given his health, I think they have a better offensive line than Carolina does, and a better not a better support system, but we all know Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels been there for years. They know what they're doing. They're a smart organization. If he's healthy, he's a top 15, top 12 quarterback, and New England will most likely be a wild card team.
Right. And with your point about the wide receivers, I think he can be a little bit more patient with guys like N'Keal Harry than maybe Tom Brady was, because obviously Tom, he knows the clock is running out in his career and he wants to win. And I think Cam may be a little bit better fit in that sense. It may fit his timeline better to work with these young receivers. And I think it'll work out. I think as you said, I think 10-6. I think that's I think they're a team that can get to 10-6. I think they can do that. That's
they can do
realistic.
that too. So I think we generally agree on what New England can be
Right.
if Cam Newton stays healthy for most of this season. So with that, we'll move on to the next big, I guess, NFL story in these dog days of summer. We're still about 4 weeks away from training camp opening. So the next big story, all-pro safety of the New York Jets, Jamal Adams, has been very vocal on social media and to fans, in fact, of his wants to get out of New York. He wants to be traded from the Jets, and very soon. So, Emily, I just want to get your opinions on who do you think are the best fits? What do you think his value is, and then which teams to you are kind of the best fits and make sense for him in a trade?
Well, first of all, I mean, in terms of fit, Jamal Adams, I feel like he's a guy that you can slide into anywhere in your defense, and he can be a difference maker. If you look at the numbers, when lined up at safety, the yards per attempt allowed went from 7.8 to 5.7 when he's at safety. And if you move into linebacker, the Jets' tackle for a loss percentage went from 16% to 30%. So he's a guy you can plug in pretty much anywhere, and he'll immediately make an impact. So, but it has more to do to me with obviously the team's situations, like whether they're in a win now mode, because it's pretty clear to me based on the teams he suggested that he wants to be on a team that's winning. And
huge.
Also cap space. That's a huge deal because he wants that big contract. So it has to be a team that's willing to give him that money.
Yeah, I'm going to start with, of course, his value. Now, I think he's the top safety in the NFL. Look, his first 3 years, 210 solo tackles, 12 sacks, 2 interceptions, 6 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 2 touchdowns. His ranks among defensive backs since he was drafted, he's 5th in tackles, 1st in tackles for loss, 1st in QB hits, 1st in sacks, and 2nd in forced fumbles. And if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty, through his first 3 seasons, Jamal Adams has more solo tackles, tackles for loss, QB hits, sacks, forced fumbles, and fumble recoveries than Steve Atwater did, the now Hall of Fame safety for the Denver Broncos, than Troy Polamalu did, the now Hall of Fame safety for, as we know, the Pittsburgh Steelers, than Ed Reed did, the Hall of Fame safety who was inducted in 2019 for the Baltimore Ravens, and Brian Dawkins, the Hall of Fame safety inducted in 2018 for the Philadelphia Eagles. Those are 4 Hall of Fame players. And statistically, Adams is right on par, if not on track to beat those players if he plays long enough. He's basically statistically on track to get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
If you just want to go by statistics, he is a Hall of Fame caliber player. So when we talk about his value, I think it's at least a 1st-round pick and then another 2nd-round pick, at least, minimum.
Right.
We saw Pittsburgh, my team, trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Still a very good player, but he hasn't reached these heights. I mean, we're talking about Hall of Fame caliber. I think that's minimum. I think it'd be tough to get what they're asking for. I think they're asking for 2 first-rounders. I think that'd be really tough for a safety. I think, outside of quarterback, I don't know a position that's really worth that much value. But, I mean, if you want a player who can come in and change your defense right away, this is it. You don't get very many opportunities with these type players. In terms of teams that I think would be good for Adams, I have 4 teams I think he's going to be changing conferences because all of these teams are in the NFC. I'll start with the Eagles. They lost, of course, their veteran safety in Malcolm Jenkins, who led them in tackles 5 of the past 6 years. If you look at Adams, one of his strengths is being able to tackle and play the run. He's one of the best tackling defensive backs we've seen in a long time. So I think, with the Eagles, their lack of depth in the secondary has been well documented the past couple years. I think trading for Darius Slay will help, and I'm not sure they may not want to give up more draft capital than they already have to acquire Darius Slay, so it may not end up actually working out. But I think in terms of fit, Philadelphia could use him tremendously. And he would improve their secondary and make it one of the best in the league, I think. He's that good. I have Dallas on this list, and I want your opinion on this after I finish. Listen to this. Now, trading for Adams would go against the grain for the Cowboys in terms of acquiring safeties. Listen to this. Dallas Cowboys have not selected a safety in the first 2 rounds of an NFL draft since 2002. Get this. To put that in perspective, 2002 was the last playoff appearance for the dreadly Cleveland Browns. So, acquiring Jamal Adams would go against the grain for the Cowboys. However, an anonymous GM and multiple GMs around the league agree that, and I don't know if you agree, but agree that safety is a position of need for the Cowboys. It's one of the weaknesses on their roster. Going into next year, they're going to have, correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to have Xavier Woods and HaHa Clinton Dix, who are both good players, but they're both in contract years, and we're talking about Jamal Adams here. So I think that 2 NFC East teams to start off, and then I have the Seahawks. When I think about Seattle, I think about their safeties, Bradley McDougall and Quandre Diggs. It's kind of the same situation as Dallas. They're both good players, but we're talking about Jamal Adams, and he could start to revive that Legion of Boom type field with him and Quandre Diggs and some of the young corners they have on the outside. He could revive that type feel in Seattle. And then think about who Seattle faces now in the NFC West. We're talking about San Francisco and George Kittle, the best tight end in the league. The best tight end in the league. You can argue, but in my opinion, he is. We're talking about the Cardinals, who now have the best receiver in the league, DeAndre Hopkins. And then we're talking about the Rams, who are still formidable, very formidable offense with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. So, I mean, acquiring Jamal Adams, I think, would be great for Seattle. One more thing before I let you speak. All top defenses, in my opinion, nowadays have a very young, if not a couple, young upcoming stars. Think about the top defenses in the league last season. The Bills. They have Ed Oliver, who's 22 on the defensive line. Tre'Davious White at cornerback. He's only 25. 2 young, budding stars in this league. San Francisco with Nick Bosa and Quan Alexander, though Quan Alexander's been hurt. You think about the Patriots with Stephon Gilmore. Although Gilmore's a little older, I think he's like 28 or 29, he's still in the middle of his prime. And then I think about my team, the Steelers. I mean, we're talking T.J. Watt, 25. We're talking Minka Fitzpatrick, 23. We're talking Devin Bush, who was a rookie last year. I mean, I look at all these top defenses, and they all have a top, young, upcoming superstar, if not star. And I know, Bobby Wagner's a great player. He's a Hall of Fame player, but he's aging. And I think that injection of youth, because Adams is only 24, could really help Seattle.
Right, exactly. Going back to what you said about the Cowboys. I mean, I completely agree. But here's the thing. It's even more important that we get Jamal Adams, because one thing that people are failing to mention is that HaHa Clinton-Dix and Xavier Woods are both free safeties. Neither of them are strong safeties. So adding Jamal Adams would fill that hole instead of putting a circle into a square hole. It just doesn't. It won't work as well, you know. So,
right. I did have another team. I don't think it was on his list, but I don't think he would actually mind if he was traded to the Buccaneers, given what they have now. Look, the Buccaneers, I think they're deep. We've said this on past podcasts. I mean, their defense is underrated. They have a lot of good players on their defense. But I just look at the connection. I mean, the Buccaneers, they're returning defensive coordinator Todd Bowles, who did this. He was Jamal Adams' head coach for his first 2 seasons with the Jets. So there is some connection there. I mean, I don't know if it will come to fruition, but that could help Tampa Bay elevate themselves from underrated defense to very good defense. So I think those are 4 teams that come to my mind when talking about Jamal Adams. But again, we're talking about, and I'm sure there's more, but we're talking about, and I know stats don't tell the whole story, but we're talking about, statistically, if he plays long enough, a Hall of Fame player.
Exactly. I mean, and if you want to go beyond stats as well, he's shown it time and time again. Just from the way he talks in interviews. I saw a video of him breaking down film, and just the way he talks about the game of football, his IQ, you can tell, is just off the charts. So, I mean, he has all the intangibles, everything he needs to be great. So, I think whatever these teams are offering, he might be worth more than that. And that's the craziest thing about the fact that he's on the market right now. And if I'm the Jets, I'm like, I'm not trading him. I no matter what, I'm not trading him. I don't care if he holds out. He's under contract for 2 more seasons, I believe.
Yep.
I'd see where it goes.
He's got this 4th year, and then he's got his 5th-year option, which I'm sure the Jets will exercise. So, man, you still have 2 more years under contract with the Jets. And as much as you don't like it, you have to watch what you say and what your actions do, because that can drive down your trade value. And if you drive down your trade value, the Jets aren't going to trade you at all. I mean, that just defeats the purpose.
Right.
So he's got to watch what he says and what he does, so his trade value doesn't go down and he doesn't get himself stuck into a situation where he has to just hold out and not play, or get himself stuck somewhere he doesn't want to be.
Right.
So those are the 2 big NFL stories. We're about.
But I have some dark horse teams that I wanted to name real quick. Sorry, the Titans. This doesn't fit like the flashy nature of the teams that he had suggested, but the thing is, the Titans do have a lot of cap space, and they are in win now mode. So if you're able to pull off the deal and get Jamal Adams, you pair him with Kevin Byard, then you have Adoree Jackson at corner, and then you got those 2 guys controlling the secondary. I think that could make for one of the best defenses in the league.
They acquired A.J. Boye, correct?
Right. Yeah, they did. Mm-hmm.
So that would be a very good secondary. And I think his attitude, it fits Tennessee's culture. It's just go and try and win. I mean, it's just football, and that's it. Yeah, you don't hear a lot of distractions coming out of that organization, or a lot of distracting stories coming out of Nashville.
Right. And I don't know if you remember, but he's had comments before where he's criticized the rule changes to like the from the less contact hitting, I guess. He's criticized those rule changes before. So he definitely has that old school mentality that would fit really well in Tennessee.
You have any other teams you want to mention, or can we
the Cleveland Browns. They also have a lot of cap space, but the thing is, I don't think Adams would want to go to a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 18 years. So you can knock them off the list. But,
yeah, I think.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, again, it's a Hall of Fame caliber player. I think both given the eye test and statistically. So, I mean, I think we both agree there. So, I mean, he's just got to be careful, watch his actions, watch his words, and hopefully he'll get traded to a team that fits and that can win now.
Right. And I think there's a much better chance that he doesn't get traded, though.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. But, I mean, just think about this. I believe the Jaguars got 2 firsts for Jalen Ramsey. And so Jamal Adams is just as good, if not a better player, than Jalen Ramsey nowadays. So, right. I mean, is he worth that? Would a team be willing to give up 2 first-rounders to get a player like – I mean, we'll just have to see. Right. But with that, we'll move on. Those are our 2 biggest NFL stories. We'll address them more as we get closer to training camp and more stories start to come out. But those are the 2 biggest today. We are going to move on now to we're going to preview slightly, I guess, some of the Eastern Conference. We're going to do we've done this before, but really not as in-depth as I think we're going to do today. We're going to go through the top 6 in the Eastern Conference. That's Milwaukee, that's Toronto, that's Boston, that's Miami, that's Indiana, and that's Philadelphia. The reason only the top 6 is because you look at Brooklyn, they're going to be missing a bunch of pieces. They're not really going to be what we think they can be. I mean, KD, Kyrie, Spencer Dinwiddie possibly, I think, just tested positive for the virus. I mean, we're talking about key pieces who aren't going to be with the Brooklyn Nets, and that's going to make it really hard for them to compete in the East this year. The Orlando Magic, I mean, they've had their share of issues. We all know that. They're in the 8th seed just because. And then the Washington Wizards, I mean, who really cares?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Being honest.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we're going to get started. We're going to do contender, pretender. But if you want, you can declare a team to be a dark horse candidate, meaning they're kind of in the middle. Like, they're not a contender, but they're not a pretender. Yeah. They can make a run.
Contender, pretender, or meh. I don't know.
Yeah.
Basically.
Exactly. So we'll start with the number 1 seed. I think we don't know the answer to this, but we'll do it anyway. The Milwaukee Bucks.
Right. Milwaukee is a contender. They're before, the coronavirus happened, I would have said that they need to get the number 1 overall seed, to be able to have home court advantage through the finals. But with the way the NBA is going to be happening now, that's not going to matter at all. So they could go 4-4 in the bubble, and it still wouldn't matter. They'd still be in the first overall seed. So
I mean, the Bucks. What is there to say? I mean, think about this. Going into the suspension of the season, which I think occurred March 11th, March 12th, it doesn't matter. But anyway, going into that, they had lost 4 of their previous 5 games. So they were on a rough little stretch for their standards heading into this hiatus. However, before the season was suspended, even with losing those 4 games, they're still on pace to win. They were still on pace to win a franchise record 67 games. I mean, come on. That's all you really need to know.
Right.
They lost 4 or 5 games, and we're still on pace to win 67 games. I mean, come on. And you look at their statistical ranks this year. first in points per game, first in net rating. They're fifth in the NBA in offensive rating, but first in defensive rating, and they're first in opponent's field goal percentage. Say what you want to say. They have, I guess before the season, suspended, in most people's eyes, the leading candidate for a repeat MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Great players around him. Another all-star in Chris Middleton. Great coach. I mean, that's all you need to know. They're a contender.
Right.
Anything else you want to say?
And Giannis, I think if he doesn't win Defensive Player of the Year, he will win one next year. He basically plays a free safety role. He just roams around and he's just everywhere. He just swarms.
He's going to win a couple eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, he's that good.
Exactly.
So Milwaukee's a contender. Now we'll move on to an interesting one, the Toronto Raptors. What do you think?
I think Toronto is a contender, but I think it's tough. They have an interesting path to the finals. If you look at it right now, once they get past their first round matchup with the Nets, as it would be right now, they would supposedly play either the Celtics or the Sixers. I think they would match up better with the Celtics given how much front court talent they have. I think if they do match up with the Celtics, I think they have a real shot at getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. And from there, given Nick Nurse's track record, I mean, I think they could just do the same thing that they did last year and just make that wall and run their way to the finals. I mean, it's a possibility.
You make good points. I think they can contend, but I'm going to call them an interesting dark horse. Now, when I say that, we'll start, I think the backbone of this Toronto team, and it has been since Nick Nurse has got there, is on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, they're second in defensive rating before the season was suspended. They're also second in opponent turnover rate and opponent field goal percentage, and that's without two elite defensive players in Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green, who they lost to free agency, as we know. I think they still have, even without Kawhi and Danny Green, they still have two all-star caliber players, very important component if you want to be in contention, as we know, for an NBA championship. Kyle Lowry and Pascal Siakam. You look at Lowry, he's been very good this season, very solid as he always is. 7th in the NBA in assists per game at 7.5. And he has an effective field goal percentage of 61% in the clutch. That's also 7th in the NBA. So he's been good in the clutch. And he's good at distributing the ball to Toronto's other, three-point shooters and stuff. Siakam, his volume's gone up since, as we know, Kawhi is gone. And Danny Green is gone, so he's getting more touches. But he's still averaging 24, 7.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, a steal, and close to a block a game on 46% from the field. And he was an all-star starter, as we know. So they have two all-star caliber players, and they were 30-11 when both Lowry and Siakam played. Both of them had their little injury stints. But I think now it's very interesting because they've had, 3 to 4 months off now once the season resumes. So they're going to be healthy. And they have a top 3 coach in Nick Nurse, possibly a Coach of the Year candidate once again. So, I mean, I think I just need to see who's going to make the big shot late now that they don't have Kawhi.
Right. I think that's the biggest question.
Once I see that, they're a contender. But for now, I'm going to call them a very, very, very interesting and dangerous dark horse.
I think it's actually Freddie Van Drake, as they say. But we can move on with that. The third seed in the Eastern Conference is the Boston Celtics. The Celtics are really interesting. They They obviously signed Kemba Walker. That's been working out great for them. But the story of the season was the emergence of Jason Tatum. First-time All-Star. He was fantastic all season. But particularly January through March, he was reaching a superstar level. So it'll be interesting to see whether he can continue that, given that he might be out of his rhythm with everything that's happened. So I think it's tough to say, but I don't know. In terms of the matchups, this team, I feel like their ceiling is the Eastern Conference Finals because they don't have the big man depth. In terms of if they match up against, let's say, Milwaukee, who's guarding Giannis? Daniel Tice, Robert Williams. I mean, I don't know about that. That's iffy.
Those are some very good points. I'm calling Boston contenders for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're going to find this fascinating, I guess. I don't know if fascinating is the right word, but Boston is the only team in the Eastern Conference, not even Milwaukee, to rank in both the top 5 in both offensive and defensive rating. Crazy, but that's what it is, according to NBA.com. Offensive rating, they ranked 4th, 113.81. And if you want to talk about the offense, I think they're the only team in the league, and I think we said this before, aside from maybe I'd say the Clippers, who they have 4 guys who can give you 20-plus on any given night. We have Jason Tatum, as we know, Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, and then Gordon Hayward. Those are 4 guys capable of giving you 20-plus any given night. So you want to talk about offense? There you go. Defense, they're also solid. They also rank 4th in defensive rating, 107.5. And listen to this. In 17 games against teams top 10 in offensive efficiency, they allowed 106 points per 100 possessions. That ranked 1st against such matchups in the NBA. And then secondly, and you mentioned it, Jason Tatum was a budding young superstar before our very own eyes, right before the season was suspended. Now, you mentioned whether he can continue his amazing play. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, given everything that's happened. But in 24 games before the All-Star break, he was averaging 22 on 50% shooting. So, good player, All-Star caliber, worthy of an All-Star selection. But in the 17 games after the All-Star break, before the season was cut off, he was averaging 29 points per game on 58% from the field. I mean, are you kidding me? If he can continue that, and not only that, he's 7th in the NBA in defensive win shares, so he's very solid on the defensive end as well. And he's one of 12 players with at least 50 steals and 50 blocks. So before the All-Star break, he was a budding superstar, great on offense and very good on defense. If he can continue that, and you have the 4 guys who can score 20 to 22, 23 points on any given night, and you have a veteran coach and playoff experience, I think they can contend. Now, whether they can beat Milwaukee or some other teams is yet to be seen, and he makes some good, valid points there, but I would call them contenders.
Right. I think it all depends on Jason Tatum, to me. If Jason Tatum continues to play like he was playing, I mean, there's no reason for me to say they're not contenders. Because, I mean, if he just stays hot like that, there's no way they'll not take a team to at least 7 games, you know? So, it all depends on Jason Tatum. But that doesn't take away the questions for me in terms of their big man depth. They're probably going to struggle with rebounding the ball against certain teams with their lineup with Jason Tatum at the 4. But that also goes the other way. He's quicker than most power forwards are. So, I mean, that goes both ways.
Yep. So that, I guess, brings us to the 4 seed, the Miami Heat. I could say they were a surprise team. I mean, I don't think we expected them to be in this position before the season began. But, I mean, 41-24 before the season was suspended. It's hard for me to say what Miami is because, look, they have the second hardest schedule going into Orlando. That plays a role. I think 7 of their 8 games are against top-tier playoff teams. I think they got to play the Bucks, Nuggets, one of the LA teams. They have a tough schedule going into Orlando. Now, how that will affect them is yet to be seen, but that's a factor. Now, we all know the heart and soul of this Miami team has been Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Butler, we all know what he gives you. I mean, 20-plus points per game, 5-plus assists, 5-plus rebounds. He'll play hard on both ends, good efficiency. We all know what Jimmy Butler is. He's got playoff experience. I mean, there's no questions here. Now, Adebayo was the really interesting player, I think, on this roster this season. He was the breakout player, averaging a double-double, 5 assists on great efficiency, 58% from the floor. Good on defense as well. Those 2 players are the heart and soul. Now, where my questions with Miami come in, especially with this long layoff, how did the Heat get here to this position, 4th in the Eastern Conference, with this record of 40-plus wins? They had to have had more than just Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. They had consistent production from young players on their roster who have little to zero playoff experience. We're talking about Kendrick Nunn. We're talking about Duncan Robinson. We're talking about Tyler Hero. We're talking about Derrick Jones Jr. I want to know if they can continue that now that they've had a 3 to 4 month layoff. And it seemed to me, even though they got to this point, they were kind of a streaky team when I watched them, at least, before the season was suspended. I want to know if they can continue to get those consistent contributions from those young players consistently. And if they can make some noise. I think I call them an unlikely dark horse because it's going to depend on a lot of factors. I think they're going to win a first-round series, especially if they're matched up against Indiana. I think they can win a first-round series. But I think if they don't get that consistent production from those younger players, I think they're going to be a one-and-done. They're going to probably beat Indiana if they're matched up with them and then lose to Milwaukee in the second round. That's just how I view the Heat.
Right. I agree. And you mentioned that tough schedule. They're only 2 games ahead of, or 2.5 games ahead of Philly and Indiana. So there is a possibility that they drop to 6. And in that case, I think they may just be a first round out. But that is worst case scenario. I think this team, they're the kind of team that's just hungry. You know, they're just filled with just dogs that just bring it. But the thing is, they were great at home this season and kind of mediocre on the road. So now that they're at a neutral site, I don't know how that will be for them.
Talk about when we talk about football, it's a lot about coaching, right? It's less about. But since in the NBA, there's only 5 players who play on the court at once, it's more about how much star power you have, right? I mean,
right,
that's what it is. I think now that we've had this 4-month layoff, 3 to 4 month layoff, with all the circumstances involved in this crazy scenario, leadership and coaching is going to matter more than it ever has. And you can't get much better than Eric Spoelstra. Just saying.
Right.
So that's just another factor that we have to. But you mentioned an interesting scenario. I mean, they could easily drop with their tough schedule to the 6th seed, where Philly is now, and they could get matched up with the Celtics, and who knows, they could get knocked out in the first round. But I think we should move on for time's sake.
Right, and but before we move on, just one thing. Jimmy Butler shot 22% in the clutch this season. That's interesting to me because normally he's a very steady clutch player. And with his 3-point shooting woes and that stat right there, I don't think you can really consider this team a contender because he's going to have to play at elite level in order for them to challenge.
I call them unlikely dark horse, and if they don't get any contributions or near the contributions they got from those young players I mentioned, I don't think they have a shot. But I mean, it was good for them to even get to this point.
Right.
So they really overachieved this season. We'll move on. The 5 seed, the Indiana Pacers. You can start with this one.
The Pacers, they got Victor Oladipo back.
Right.
Obviously, that was right before it was unfortunate because it was right before the NBA suspended. So he was just starting to get his legs under him. But that's really the question with this team. That it's just what Victor Oladipo are we getting? Because if we're getting the Victor Oladipo of 2018, then for sure they can challenge anybody. Considering Sabonis is improved this year, they added Brogdon. And their bench is also deeper this year, adding guys like Jeremy Lamb. So I think if you're getting Victor Oladipo from 2018, then yes, they are a dark horse. But if you're just getting rusty Victor Oladipo, then I don't know if they have enough scoring, enough firepower.
I know you were going to bring up Victor Oladipo, and it's interesting. It's good that you do because I don't know if you saw the report, but according to ESPN today, I was just, as I always do, I'm just...
Ooh, don't tell me.
I look at ESPN every day. So, I mean, according to ESPN, shooting guard Victor Oladipo remains undecided on whether he will report to Orlando for the season's resumption. So, that... I know you probably didn't know, but that already brings me to just Indiana's an interesting team. Very interesting team. They're always in this position, right? Very solid organization, coach. They're just a very solid, above average definition of good, solid NBA basketball team. They're not great, but they're just good, right? All the time. Now, if Oladipo is out, of course, we all know that makes them basically they're written down in the death note, basically.
Right, exactly. Pretenders.
Like they're going to get mushed by either the Heat or the Celtics if they fall. You know how that's going to work. But if Oladipo plays, I still think they're a pretender. I think the strength of this Indiana team, as you mentioned, is in the front court. With Sabonis and Miles Turner. We talked about Sabonis, an all-star, 18.5 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists. Very solid player. 50 double-doubles, 4 triple-doubles. I mean, very solid player. And then Miles Turner, he's really the foundation for their defense. That ranks 7th in the NBA, which is very good, ranking 4th in blocks per game at 2.2. So, and then you factor in that Oladipo, of course, as I mentioned, might not even come, and the fact that Malcolm Brogdon recently tested positive for the coronavirus. So how that situation, he should be healthy by the time the season resumes. But, you know me. I'm a Virginia basketball fan. I love Malcolm Brogdon, but he's not not good enough at all to lead this team anywhere past the first round.
Right.
If they even get anywhere close to getting out of the first round, given their situation. So, very solid team, but I just don't see it. They're the only team I would really say is actually pretenders. Maybe Miami, but they at least have an interesting situation, and they could make a run. But with that being said, you get the point.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I don't know what time we have. It doesn't really say on my Zoom, but
we're at 50 minutes right now.
50 minutes. Okay, perfect. So that brings us to our last team. And keep in mind, we're going to get more in depth in these previews in terms of like making predictions and stuff. Hopefully, once we get closer to the season resuming and the actual playoffs. If you want predictions, you're going to have to wait for those. But just in terms of assessing teams, something we really didn't do at the start of the season because, we were headed to college and we didn't really get a chance to do an actual NBA preview. So this is good that we're doing this. That brings us to our last team, the Philadelphia 76ers, who are the 6th seed right now. But only, as you mentioned, 2 games back of the Heat for the 4th seed.
All right.
So what do you think about the Sixers?
The Sixers are, they are what they are. I think you can talk about all the star power. You can say what you want about it, but the bottom line is you got to get something out of Joel Embiid. You got to get him in shape first of all, and then secondly, you still have the questions about Ben Simmons in the playoffs.
Right.
And he still doesn't have a jump shot. So until he gets a jump shot, they're just going to be limited offensively. There's just no way to get around that. I mean, as good of a basketball player as he is, he's a great basketball player. But particularly at the point guard spot, you got to be able to at least just shoot. Just shoot it. Like, even if you miss, like, who cares? Just shoot it. Just be a threat. But he hasn't shown that ability. And I think their lack of leadership has really shown this year. We've seen Jimmy Butler, after he left, he went on J.J. Redick's podcast, and he's told a story where he went into the first film session in Philly, and nobody was saying anything. They were just watching the clip. Brent Brown would just click to the next clip, and he wasn't saying anything. So there was just a vacuum of leadership until Jimmy Butler got there. And I think that vacuum is showing, and it's shown all year.
Right. It's hard for me to say with the Sixers what they are. I think if everything goes right, they're definitely an interesting, very dangerous dark horse, given their talent, especially in the starting lineup. Their top 6 players, talent-wise, are probably arguably the best in the league.
Right, exactly.
If healthy, that being said. But the interesting knock on the Sixers before the season was suspended was right at home. I think they were like 25-2 at home.
Right, 29-2 at home.
Very good at home, but terrible on the road. They were horrendous.
Yeah,
10-24
on the road.
10-24, that's right. Outscored by an average of 6 points per possession. That's horrendous. So, now that they're on a neutral court, we'll just have to see. What are you laughing at now?
6 points per possession, that's not possible.
That's what NBA.com has.
Is it per 100 possessions?
Yeah.
Never mind. Just keep going. Sorry.
100 possessions. But whatever. You guys get the point. They were just horrendous on the road. Now, as I was saying, they're now on a neutral court, so we don't know how that is going to, factor into their success or not success in the playoffs. But I mean, they're just kind of a mess. I mean, you talked about Ben Simmons, his either inability or unwillingness, probably some of both, to shoot the basketball. It's well documented. It's like the only thing people talk about when they talk about the Sixers. But, I mean, he's a great basketball player otherwise. I mean, he leads the NBA with 221 assists on three-pointers. He's also leads the NBA with 2.2 steals per game and ranks third in deflections per game. So very solid on the defensive end, every aspect except for shooting. And then Embiid, he's probably, when healthy, the second or third best player in the East. But we talk about the health issues, and then is he focused and motivated all the time? Those are valid questions. So it's just hard to say what the Sixers are. I think everything has to come together, and it probably just might be too much.
Right. I
it's
know
sad
that
they can't get it together because this roster, I mean, its potential is.
the potential is there, and the sad thing is, this is it. This is their squad for the next few years, unless they make a crazy trade. There's nothing they can do. They got no cap flexibility. I mean, this is the squad right here. So, get what you're gonna get.
That is our mini preview of the 2020 NBA season resumption for the Eastern Conference. Now, we put the Eastern Conference in this episode because, let's get over it, there's a lot more to talk about in the Western Conference.
Right.
So our next episode will be dedicated to, I guess, the Western Conference. Probably in the next couple of days, if I had to guess. We'll get that to you. And then as more NFL or baseball or whatever it is stories come out, we'll address those as well. But that's going to do it for episode 45 of the Raw Prospect Podcast. For Remy Nixon, I'm Michael Ween. Peace out. See you next time.
See ya.